그의 모양은 피카소가 green dream처럼 삐뚤어졌을지 몰라도 결국엔 이런 게 돈이 될지 몰라 똑같은 주제 똑같은 느낌 동양의 two chain man I'm all so different 동양의 달리 but I'm 21st century 누구든 이걸 듣는다면 놀라겠지 흠칫 절대 훔칠 수 없는 내 identity 예술가들은 이게 뭔지 알겠지 겁이 없고 과감한 어린 아이의 feel 난 오늘 밤 마치 살바도르 달리 Van Gogh 같이 Picasso in my body Man I'm fucking artist 달리 ven Picasso 를 보면 난 자랐어 내 도물감을 찾고 난 여기까지 왔어 And you can tell me nothing You know that I'm doing it right 내가 누군지 묻지 마 I'm 달리 ven Picasso 아마 누군가 나를 미쳤다고 보겠지 만난 그런 걸 상관 안 하는 성격이지 물감 묻은 붓같이 끈적이는 여름밤 내 목소린 곳곳에 퍼졌지 여름밤 하늘에 부서진 내 목소린 붉은색 와인처럼 몽롱해 폴고갱이 화폭에 옮긴 타이트처럼 내 심장도 뜨겁네 Are you with me? Are you listening? Or do you hate me like you don't feelin' this shit? 아마도 내가 그렇듯 예술에 미친 애들은 느끼고 있겠지 칼에 찔린 듯이 지금 이 느낌은 심상치 않네 그 누구도 이런 시도를 안 해 분명한 건 지금 내 몸 안에 내가 아닌 누군가가 함께 살바도르 달리
Hi. Hi, everyone. That was fast. Wow. Good evening and welcome to the Poetry Project. I'm Kay Gabriel, and it's a very great pleasure to introduce Gary and Deanna for tonight's program, the launch of the reissue of Indiana's 2003 novel, Do Everything in the Dark. Before we get started, some announcements. For those of you who haven't been to the church before, restrooms are upstairs. There's an accessible restroom on this level. If you need to use that, find me or another staff member. We can let you in and show you to it. As you will have noticed that it is standing room only. That's nice. Or rather, there's not enough chairs. If you need to sit, please don't stand on ceremony. Please tap someone and let them know if you are someone who can sit on the floor or stand and you are thus tapped. Please give up your seat. Before we get started, I also want to flag your attention to a couple of upcoming events. On Friday at 8 in this room, we're hosting Niall Harris and Andrew J. Smith. Andrew is one of our Emerge Surface B Fellows, and we're looking forward to celebrating both his fellowship and Niall's performance, which I'm informed will be extraordinary. Wednesday next week, we're hosting Maureen Owen and Susie Timmons, which will be really special. And on Friday, May 12th, so a week from Friday, we're very honored to host a memorial for Bernadette Mayer. It will be her 78th birthday. It'll be in the sanctuary. We will have copies of the new spring issue of the Poetry Project newsletter, which I edit, and which is entirely dedicated to essays about her. The current winter issue of the newsletter is on your chairs. It's very special as well. Please take one home. Take one for a friend. We really need to get rid of the copies, so you're doing us a favor. There's a scene in Do Everything in the Dark where one of the characters, Malcolm, sits a few blocks from here in Union Square before he goes into a big box store to sell overpriced crap to people he feels contempt for. Quote, "The calculated illogic of everything sends thousands each day into transports of credit card abandon that move a Niagara of cash around the world. The megastore's revenue spills cleanly into the raging river of cash and credit and digital wealth, spinning numbers in and out of corporate bank accounts. Somewhere, no doubt, this river sucks up the tributaries of loot generated by the inauthentic, the counterfeit, the Jennifer Lopez knockoffs." End quote. It's very nearly a Marxist experiment, narrating the world first from the point of view of its cash flow, and then the retail worker who lubricates with the precious hours of his life money's transubstantiation into more of itself. For all that Do Everything in the Dark is technically concerned with the lives of its variously sad sack, though mostly not indigent artists, one gets the sense that the real reason for their shared and individuated enemy is this river of cash, sucking everyone and everything towards what Indiana ominously refers to as the falls, and the depth of human immiseration that makes it possible. It's a trippy, distorted effect, witnessing the planetary transit of capital from half a dozen sets of puny eyes. Distortion, in satire's special way, is one of Indiana's talents, in the same way that a photograph of massive scale will bend perspective into distorted shapes, or an aesthetic of the grotesque will render real details at cartoonish size. Indiana's writing leaps between scales at a dizzying clip, and he has a great hand at writing grotesquerie. It keeps him flush to the truth. From the distorted perspective of Indiana's books, we see the hideously wealthy making their ugly way across the ugly world they also made. These bourgeois gargantuas sometimes fight with all their power and cunning to control the world they believe belongs to them so they can wreck it on their own terms. Sometimes, and more relatably, they just fuck, drink, snort, and lie about it. A subterranean river of class rage courses under the equally disturbed surface of Do Everything in the Dark, though typically it's expressed in disorganized, unstrategic ways. Petty thefts of American tourists in Istanbul, or Ulrike Meinhof shrugging off investigative journalism for her more notorious adventures. It's similar to the violent lashing out that characterizes Rent Boy, Indiana's recently republished noir fiction, whose central heist involves a plan to rob a CEO of his organs, or Depraved Indifference, whose hucksters bilk their way through the ruling class in a vacuous Southwest as if they were characters in Brecht's City of Mahogany, or 3 Month Fever, a retelling of Andrew Cunanan's 1997 The Killing Spree. Indiana amplifies these stories of wrong life, not as morality tales of bad souls adrift in Sin City, but instead as burning examples of what people do, what they really do, in the world produced in the eddies of the falls. Kristen Ross calls satire a mode of contamination. Satire borrows the language of one's enemy and dresses in it to achieve its intended distortion. Gary Indiana is a writer of contamination whose twisted syntax captures the feeling tone of living in a world in which profit really devours people, and they only sometimes notice. He is a satirist of surgical precision and a personal fave. Please join me in welcoming Gary Indiana to the Poetry Project.
Who knew? Thank you very much. That was lovely. It occurred to me today that we really shouldn't be upset about AI. Because I'm sure that every studio film produced in the last 10 years was written by AI. They just didn't tell us. Where do you think the Marvel universe comes from? I'm going to read something incredibly depressing. And you can blame Nan Golden because she asked me to write it. It's going into my novel that I'm working on, but it initially was something she wanted for a catalog for her big show in Sweden. She just wrote to me and said, "Could you write something about getting old?" And I said, "Can I ever?" So as a self-contained thing, which I'm actually going to stick in the consciousness of somebody else who's not me, It's called Where Have All the Good Times Gone? And it really is depressing. It happens when you feel the other parenthesis, the one at the end, as it presses your skin, wraps itself around your chest like a tightening belt. You can still breathe, but not as well. You can still sing, but not with the notes you could hit before. You can still spit, but life has moved past the spitting stage. It's when things fail to return to normal that finally you get it. This is normal. It happens as decades of mishaps and malfunctions befalling the bag of water and bones you inhabit add up to an irreversible mess, one that no longer feels entirely like you. It is you. This is what you're told by doctors, friends, cashiers at the supermarket. This is what you tell yourself without believing it entirely. This is what you learn when people offer to help you when you don't need any help. When people ask if you're all right, if you stop walking to catch your breath or buckle slightly under the weight of it all. It's when good intentions leave a sinister aftertaste. It's also when you entertain the possibility that you do, in fact, need help. If not yet, soon. It happens when you realize that your legs are no good anymore. They won't carry you far before they hurt. In a bombardment, you will move the slowest. The others might have to leave you on the trail. Fortunately, you are safe for now, safe perhaps until the end, but the world is fickle and passing time alters everything. The streets you knew no longer resemble the routes in your memory, and the people on them walk differently, weighted down by days, weeks, months, years of private and personal wranglings that stick like burrs in the flow of events. New people rush past you in a frenzy to kill time as recklessly as possible. You want to be like them, reckless and blind to consequence, but you can't be. You may not remember the movie in much detail, but you have seen it before. The residue of everything is what you'd like to get rid of, the old streets, the old faces, the old conversations, the old way of being known to the others. But the facts are inescapable. They're adding up as the busy work of whatever powers that be. It happens when they can't immobilize you for the surgery because your lungs won't survive the anesthesia. When you see that the final wheeze will arrive in less time than the last time you actually had fun. It happens when your ability to laugh it all off goes missing for longer and longer spells, when simply existing in time feels like a deflating challenge. It's when your reserves have mysteriously emptied. Complaints take the place that effusions of happiness used to fill. Something is always going wrong, slipping out of control. The sensation of chaos overmasters the most painstaking displays of order. Nothing rings true, or rather nothing feels true. There is always a foam of corrosion at the edge of any certainty. One thing that isn't there is an expansive view of the future. The future has become little, like a baby bump. It happens when your center of gravity drops below your spinal column, when your mind collects dust as often as it gleans information, when what is important boils down to what is necessary, to get through the next stretch of days, to clear up ambiguities, to get the bills paid, to keep the engine running. It happens when the outside world corresponds word for word with the panic inside you. When you hear people in authority say what you tell the blank wall at 3 a.m, these are dark times. Meaning dark for everybody, it's not only you. And you alone can't fix it. It happens when you understand that you were never in a position to fix anything. It's the little moments in the day when you cannot remember the name of that actress, that author, that person you lived with in 1987. Bits of information fly around in your head, eluding capture as if you were drunk, and you're not. You are about to finish telling a funny story with the words gluten-free, and suddenly you can't find them, can't find gluten-free. In a brain so full of words they stick to each other and become illegible, like gluten itself, maybe. It's discovering that almost everyone you truly liked has died, that you are now engaged in a dire, depressing contest with all the ones still living. I guess it's not that depressing. and that winning would be the inconsolable, loneliest victory anyone could achieve. Alive after all that, and in many areas of life, already past it. Of any two people, someone always goes first. It happens when you see yourself in a photograph, no matter when it was taken. Everything recorded is a record of the past, and this is how you looked then, how the world around you looked in your immediate friends, and this was a room someone lived in, and how people were wearing their hair. Even a year ago, you think, I looked better. Or else you think you look better now. Or else you think, that isn't really me. But it is something, an entrance into what is secretly known or repressed or misremembered, stored in some cerebral cave, a feeling forgotten until this optical encounter. Or it may also be a later picture that fills in missing time, the middle-aged face, for example, of this person you were crazy about when they were 20. A mania that ended very badly. You confront the fate of faces and the shallow depths of your former emotions when you try to imagine feeling the same things again. You couldn't love that face in its current state. It's like a tire with too much tread on it. And what does that tell you about how much you loved it in the first place? It was just a phase. And here it still is, wised up and cruelly weathered by decades of disappointment, like your own face in the mirror. We all live at least one or two lives that we subtract from our biographies, areas of unrevisited, unhealed pain, or such monumental nothingness that they're not worth remembering. Then, infrequently, some evidence turns up, often photographic evidence. You are seized suddenly by a grisly species of curiosity. Oh yes, you were alive then and had some sort of wishes or plans, casting shadows on the path ahead. What appeared then is the path ahead, an ambition or two, and back then, when the way things are today could hardly be imagined, you used to do that with your face. Those days, those plangently hopeless, barren days that felt like sludge. And these people, that one's dead, this one never managed anything, that one is still trying despite everything. This ended in divorce, that ended in murder-suicide. Most of this just ended undramatically. How sad any piece of collective evidence really is. It happens that validation can never be satisfied. With solidity comes decrepitude. The more we become what we intended to be, the less real the earlier versions of ourselves appear to us. And yet there we were, who we were, forever, for all time, a monad on its travels through the dark times, the insoluble passage. An era can be just what it looks like, finally, with everybody's footnotes crammed into the bottom of the frame. Everything begins to feel like an epilogue or a summing up, when in fact all you want is right now, to live in this minute, this world, not ever to go back, never to take up residence in the house of memory, at the very least to leave some doors and windows open to whatever new breeze might blow, because there is still time left over from time. Every minute that you didn't die is time and a half, so to speak. You even have time to learn to bake bread or repair a motorcycle. After time runs out, you will persist in someone's memory somewhere, the way alcoholics say, it's 5 o'clock somewhere. They didn't actually ever get back to me when I gave it to them. But they paid for it, so I assume it went into the catalog. I don't want to read for too long, but the trouble with what I picked out of this book, the one that was just reissued, is that setting the thing up is a little bit long, so maybe I can synopsize a little bit. This is a group of people that are all, like, they've all gone to an island in the, I think it's an island near Gibraltar. It's probably like Ibiza, not Ibiza, but someplace like that, for the summer. And there are two men who have been in a relationship for a long time, Oliver and Arthur, And they're in one house. These other people are in a whole kind of compound that they bought, and then some other people show up. Anyway, then other people come, like so I'll just, so I can start later on, like further along. Arthur sensed trouble as soon as the new arrivals checked into a waterfront hotel and trekked up the steep, narrow-stepped hillside where Henry and Valerie Willie maintained their many-splendored multi-building compound. Arthur recalled the sinister arrival of Mr. Jones and his ape-like servant on another island in Joseph Conrad's Victory. I couldn't shake the impression that they'd been summoned, Arthur told me, lighting his 7th cigarette in 20 minutes. Oh yeah, and the narrator and Arthur are presently in his office. He's a pornographer and he's editing a porno film while he's relating what happened on the island. As the naked Puerto Ricans on screen use their employer's mouth as a urinal, invited, even though Freddie Waste has never ever been invited anywhere. Arthur's casting methods, consistent with a certain trailer park mise-en-scène, created long existential lapses in the action when, for example, models hired for active penetration failed to achieve erections. On the monitor behind Arthur's head, the, quote, fat pig bottom, unquote, filleted his 2 golden showering partners in tedious rotation. One fleetingly stiffened. He positioned himself at the pig's buxom rear end. He abruptly deflated, ineptly simulating penetration. The camera swiftly panned to the ongoing blowjob at the pig bottom's front end. Most people who buy this stuff aren't into penetration anyway, Arthur assured me when I pointed this out. They mainly want to see humiliation. Insidiously, said Arthur, over a week, Sylvia regained her status as court favorite, the summer friend who very well might be invited back next year. The Willies ruled the island socially, unless you escaped and made other friends, in which case the Willies dropped you. Each year, the imperious couple lured to the island several compatriots, some single, some coupled. The fortunate ones got to witness, rather than undergo, the psychological destruction of the year's chosen victim. Meanwhile, Freddie and Dickie joined the ritual breakfast routine at the Moor Hut, followed by a cliffside lunch at the island's smaller village. One walked to it or took a water taxi, according to Valerie's whim, at whichever taverna endured Valerie's patronage that year. There were 2 tavernas in the village. Every summer, Valerie initiated a feud with one or the other and patronized the supposedly rival establishment all summer. Valerie had no interest in the little local people, Arthur said, or she would have figured out by this time that both tavernas were owned by the same family. Dinner was usually eaten at a restaurant at the bottom of a dark, plummeting valley, southeast or southwest, Arthur never could get it straight, of the hillside enclave where their houses stood above the port. If you missed your footing on the cement walkway, you'd tumble through brambles and tall weeds and other stinging, scratching flora. At the very bottom, like the Phantom of the Opera's dining room, sat a flagstone oasis of quiet, a peaceful, well-stocked bar inside, tables outside, a kitchen offering halfway edible paella, tapas, and so forth. I'm going to skip a little bit here. Dickie and Freddie irritated Arthur without becoming completely odious. That was the bitch of it, he laughed. They brought in just enough of what you didn't want that you had to take it in stride, like a good Christian, when what would have come in handy, he said, quoting a surrealist poet, was an eraser to wipe out human filth. At meals, Freddie flaunted a tiresome gift for describing works of art, churches, and other landmarks he'd recently viewed crossing Europe, peppering conversations with invasive, stupid questions, idiotic jokes that scraped everybody's nerves. He dressed in splashy Bermuda shorts and Sea Island shirts and flip-flops that dangled from his stubby, ugly feet. Dickie had a compulsion to deflect serious talk into streams of Dada-esque absurdity, funny but meaningless, as if anything involving 2 consecutive thoughts that weren't the build-up and punchline of a joke offended his idea of a good time. Dickie's presence wearied Arthur, not because Arthur wanted to talk about big metaphysical questions, but because he resented having to laugh his head off at dinner when he already had to make an effort not to radiate misery in every direction. Dickie insisted on turning any meal into a henfest of dueling witticisms. All the more surprising, then, that one night at the Willey compound, a night when Arthur had to take the hydrofoil to Gibraltar to deal with some family crisis by telex and local attorney, the same manic Dickie Piedmont, ridiculous Freddie Waste, and far from teetotaling Sylvia White took part in an intervention, orchestrated by Henry and Valerie, aimed at stripping Oliver of every defense, confronting him with the drunken outrages he'd committed in the past, the decline in his productivity, and his increasingly withdrawn personality, and offering, now demanding, that he accept their munificent offer to pay for a month's rehab at Hazleton. All behind my back, Arthur said. A raspy congestion betrayed a nibbling doubt that he fully deserved his indignation. This was the part of Arthur that had been trained for years by people like the Willeys to think of himself as nothing. Because no matter how fucked up my relationship with Oliver is, if I'd been there, I would have defended him. I would have insisted we leave and never speak to these bastards again. Oliver described the evening in gruesome detail. First, Valerie served her famous Mediterranean clay pot chicken with the olives and capers and lemons all over it. You know what a whiz Valerie is with chicken. Well, I guess you don't. It was true. I avoided people like the Willeys who collected friends and discarded them like kids trading baseball cards. Rice pilaf, endive salad. The girls, the two Willie brats, went off to the disco, and everybody else gravitated into the salon they have with a huge marble floor and fat lounging pillows. Valerie wore her painting slacks and a sweatshirt and had her hair tied back in the pigtail she started wearing when she became a painter. As if she were about to attack a canvas. Everyone else had casual linen, whatever they normally wore to dinner. Valerie carried in a fruit bowl and some bottles of sparkling water and set them down on this knee-high glass coffee table. She squatted on her knees, facing Oliver, and said, "Oliver, Henry and I are very concerned about you. We've asked everybody here to help you see why and persuade you to do something about it, which Henry and I are willing to help you with, financially, morally, and spiritually." According to Oliver, Henry then nodded gravely, even spiritually and morally. For some reason, Oliver told Arthur, I thought somehow they knew I had cancer and I didn't. Sylvia White had seemed at least at home in this situation, squirming through many of the ugly details Henry and Valerie spun out, at times giving them a comic twist that somewhat belied their spiritual and moral gravity. It's the drinking, Oliver, Valerie told him in a harsh voice, as I'm sure we don't need to tell you. It's reached the point where people can't stand being around you, and Arthur enables you. He doesn't go over the edge like a maniac the way you do, but he allows it to happen. That night you passed out with your face in the salad bowl, Henry put it in quietly. I've seen you some nights in New York, Freddie Waste jumped in gleefully, when you didn't know where you were. You were so drunk people had to bring you home in a cab to make sure you recognized your own door. You don't even remember the time you fell, said Valerie, right there, out there on the steps. She started to giggle, but forced her face into a stern mask of matronly exasperation. You got a lump the size of a doorknob on your forehead, scrapes and bruises all over. That night you called the Australian in the moorhut a pig's asshole and threw a table at him. Remember the boat picnic when you puked into Dorothea's penne? Oliver told Arthur he'd stared at the Bokhara carpet covering the marble floor and tried to think of some rejoinder. Shame reddened the lordless areas of his face. I've been there, crooned Dickie Piedmont's reedy, cotton-soft hissings after an otiose silence. I really fought getting help for a long time, and my life kept sliding downhill. My boyfriend was no help because as long as I was a drunk, he could twist that to manipulate me. I'd go out to clubs, stagger home with strangers, have sex without protection. Finally, bingo, HIV. I do not have HIV, Oliver shrieked, finally bristling, though he felt he had something worse, like the Ebola virus. Arthur and I don't even have sex. Lucky you, from what I hear, Freddie. Maliciously brave and capable of controlling himself. Oliver winced. Let's not stray from the point, said Valerie, more softly than was her custom, though her voice still grated as if some zircon she'd swallowed had scraped her vocal cords. Your alcohol problem is wrecking your life. You're destroying your liver and your kidneys and driving away all your friends. I think, Valerie nods, I drink. Henry drinks, but not to get drunk. We don't knock back one after another until our brains are scrambled. The bottom line is, at the end of the month, we can pay off our credit cards. She stopped for a commanding breath. Sylvia White's color had been draining steadily since the onset of this gangbang, as she recognized herself in everything Oliver was being accused of. You have to understand, said Valerie, we love you. Everyone in this room loves you. Oliver, if we didn't love you, if we didn't care what happened to you, we wouldn't bother doing this. Valerie went blank for a moment. We'd drop you, she added thoughtfully. I love you too, man, said Freddie Wace, suiting action to word by his lights, slapping Oliver heartily on the back. I love you too, Sylvia White ventured nervously, and I don't even know you. Valerie began pacing the room like a solo performer on a Shakespeare stage. You are loved and you are valued, she chanted in oracular fashion. Her voice was least abrasive when spouting cliches. But you have to learn to love and value yourself, Dickie Piedmont declared with the pat wisdom of the recently dried. And you can't do that when you're guzzling a quart of gin every day. Oliver doesn't drink gin, snapped Valerie pedantically, somewhat rupturing the atmosphere of uplift. But Dickie's basically right. Until you learn to love yourself, you can't really love anybody else. By this time, tears were streaming down Oliver's bloated face. He felt like an elephant being poked with metal spears by sadistic zookeepers, but they weren't through with him. You can't put yourself back together by yourself, Valerie declared, stabbing the air in Oliver's direction with a little finger. With the other hand, she plucked a green-gauge plum from the fruit bowl and took a hearty bite. Realistically, said Henry, emerging Swami-like from a long, detached-looking silence, you need to go somewhere professional for a time. Henry helped himself to a plum as if the ingestion of plums marked the conclusion of the entire matter. Away from the temptations and stresses that set you off. I'm going to just... Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. We're gonna have a conversation talk. Jennifer Krasinski and I are gonna chit chat for your edification.
Thank you so much, Gary. That was extraordinary. Can we please? I would like to welcome Gary and Jennifer Krasinski back to the front of the room for a conversation. We are about to set up the chairs. Amazing.
Okay, that's great. We'll take a little break. All right. Okay, I'm going to pass this to you.
Is that okay if y'all are closer? Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah?
Do you have a favorite side? Do you have a better,
You mean like,
better profile?
where do they take blood?
Yeah, exactly.
Over here.
On the left.
Ooh. Well, I don't know.
You ready?
We're ready.
Let's do
Okay.
it.
Okay.
I was just asking Gary if you had a preferred side, like a profile. Left, right.
That's the point equally bad. No, it's fine. How do we?
Yeah, do you want to?
Yeah, I've only done a few of these things. Never know what you're supposed to be looking at.
I don't know. I mean, here we are.
Okay,
Pleasure to be here.
same here.
I'm going to start, Gary, the other day you told me, and you've actually gone on record as saying that you have no imagination.
It's true.
Well, no, I think that you have a room full of people who would argue with you. What do you mean by no imagination? We just, we just listened to a lot of evidence to the contrary.
I don't know, something Viva said to me like eons ago, and I just said, that's really just exactly what you should say. Because I don't know, because people think that everything's real, and what I meant was, if I'm writing something, if I'm writing a piece of fiction, I have to base it somewhere. And I think when I first started writing fiction, I was so dominated by the idea that everything had to follow logically from something else, that if I changed one little aspect of anything, if I changed one little detail of anything that I was actually basing something on, then it wouldn't sound like reality. And so I think that stayed with me over years, not as intensely as the first book I did, but enough so that I don't really think I'm exercising my imagination when I make things up, because there's always some core of something that actually is real or really happened in it. But also, I mean, I just think the imagination is very overrated in certain ways. I mean,
How so?
Well, I think actually writers aren't praised so much for their imagination anymore, unless it's somebody like, Margaret Atwood or somebody like this who writes like future things, science fiction or whatever. I don't know. What do you think? Yeah, what do you think?
I think everything that you write about happened to you, or you believe that it did.
Here, I just did that.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Here, I swapped.
Well, yeah. I mean, just in one way or another.
Yeah.
Maybe not directly.
Or it could have.
It could have.
Yeah.
So that's speculation of a kind.
Well, yeah, but speculation and imagination are not the same thing.
Right.
I think of the imaginary as the Freudian place that you go to, in a kind of a dirty way.
And yet, well, when writing criticism,
Yes.
which we're not really going to talk about, except I had to just stick this in for a second.
Yeah.
One of the challenges of writing criticism, right, and we sort of talked about this the other day, is that you're beholden to the imagination of everybody else. And so then, I don't know that I have a fine point of a question here, but then one is up against the world's lack of imagination at some point.
I don't know what you mean. What about you were up against everybody else's imagination?
Yeah, like when you were at The Voice and you were doing art reviews, and you would go into an art show, and invariably not all of them were brilliant, or not all of them were had robust imaginations behind them.
Well, yeah, okay.
And so, I guess the prompt is just to maybe we move on.
Other people have. Yeah, I mean, other people's imagination doesn't bother me. I don't hold it against them.
I want to talk about also the book that's coming out, the book that's being reissued.
Yeah.
And for people who haven't read the new, the new version, as it were, which comes with a beautiful introduction by Gary. And in this introduction, you talk about the genesis of this book. And sorry to prompt you to talk about something that you've written about, but can you tell people the origin story of Do Everything in the Dark? Because it's a bit different from your other novels.
Not really.
It always started as...
Well, no, I mean, it's different. Formally, it's different, and it's a different milieu and everything, but no, because usually most of my books always start with some weird thing, like somebody tells me something. At Rempoi, somebody at dinner told me about a guy waking up in Central Park without a kidney. And it was way before that became a commonplace story. It was like before you ever heard that before. And I thought I could do something with that. And in this case, Billy Sullivan, who's a great dear friend of mine, painter, had this guy, I can't remember the guy's name. He had kind of a little muddy reputation, but anyway, he was suddenly producing these art books, these really expensive art books, or at least that was what he said he was doing. And so we were going to make a book where this series of paintings that Billy had done of, people, he paints people in his life, people in his milieu, and I was going to write stories to go with the paintings that were based not on the people in the paintings per se, but just to kind of imaginatively project these figures into fictional situations. So I started writing that book like that. And then we realized, like in the course of, I don't know how many months, that this book was never going to happen. And but I just kept writing the book anyway. That's how it came about. It was going to be these little vignettes of these people, but then they developed into characters who, all had these long stories.
Were these people that you also knew, that you and Billy had sort of decided on together?
No, he had decided which pictures were going to go in the book, and I did know some of the. I knew most of the people, but yeah.
And you're,
I mean, the people conflate fiction with. Everybody thinks that if you make a fictional character that's based on somebody, that you're writing directly about them, but you're really not. It's a real transposition of all kinds of things, including your feelings about them. I mean, if you're writing a satire, then people are not going to come out looking great. But this was very well understood in previous times. In the world, in the world of today, it's a little more dicey. Because people are, I mean, I think I'm literal-minded, but people today make me look wildly imaginative, actually.
Wait, let's get to that.
Yeah.
In your conversation with Chris Kraus in Interview Magazine, if you haven't read it yet, it's a really brilliant, invigorating read. You and Chris both talk about this idea of, well, first you sort of share your love of Mary McCarthy, which I also, I'm on Team Mary as well. And you segue into this conversation around cruelty, or the perception of cruelty around this kind of writing. Satire, in McCarthy's case, it was Romana Clay. Can you talk a little bit about what's been lost, a little more specifically, like what's changed contextually?
Well, I think people should toughen up. I really do. I like what people think anything now is outrageously cruel. You know, I mean, we're just actually just making fun. I'm not necessarily, no, I think people should toughen up. You know, all those partisan review people, they were tough enough, you know. Like when she would, you know, write these devastating things about them, I mean, they got pissed off for a while, but then they think, it's Mary, you know. And, you know, I don't know, I mean, I think Fran Lebowitz was saying in that Martin Scorsese thing, why do people care what my opinion is? You know, I'm not in power. I'm not running their lives. I mean, why do people? It's just my opinion. It's just what I wrote. So what? Don't read it. If you're going to be offended by it, don't read it. I mean, really.
Well, there's also this equation. I mean, I know I had a conversation with a young colleague, and I was talking about a writer that we both admire. It wasn't you, don't worry. And I described this writer as somebody.
That's the greatest backhanded compliment I've ever heard.
I needed an editor for that one. Sorry, Gary. Okay, it was you, Gary. It's going to be hard for me to recover now. So, no, the point being that talking about this writer, and I said something maybe not kind about this writer, and this young colleague said to me, oh my God, that was so mean, and it was so true. And suddenly I was being chided for saying something that this person thought was true, and there's this strange, go on, you look like you have something to say about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, true according to you. So, I mean, no, exactly. I mean, like, you know, it's true according to me. But, you know, on another day, I would write something else. You know, it's not like you're... I'm not framing a grand jury indictment of anybody. It's like, you know, happened to strike me that summer that these people were kind of fucked up. I mean, you know... That's all it is. I mean, you know, grown-ups can take it. You know, it's like the one person who came back to me about it totally understood what I was doing. I mean, she said she didn't want to read it, but people had told her what it was, and she didn't mind. Right. So. Of course, also was one of the better treated people in the book, but with the,
Well, I want to ask some word nerdier questions, like sort of formal questions around this book, because it did start as vignettes, and it does sort of open up that way. And before I read your introduction, I started the book, and one of the first people that came to mind sort of formally was Renata Adler's Speedboat, which I don't know that you had in mind when you were writing the book. But... No. But yeah, no, I'm just curious to know how the form, I know how it began with this sort of idea of the vignette or sort of writing these descriptions of people, and that it sort of takes on its own momentum, but you keep the chapters pretty tight, and I don't even know if I should call them chapters.
Well, they're numbered.
They're numbered.
They're chapters.
But you can number so many things. You know,
Speedboat is a very high bar. Of, you know, it's like
I think you're there.
It's pretty, but no, but you know, I love Renata dearly. She's a dear friend, and also I think that book is a great book. So is Pitch Dark. I didn't have that in mind necessarily. What I had in mind actually at the beginning was the Rilke novel, the Notebooks of Maria Multibreg. Because the very first part is actually kind of extracted from the beginning of that book, where he's walking down the street in Paris past the Hôpital Val de Grâce. That was the initial thing for me. If I had any kind of model in my head, it was the Rilke novel. But I love novels that are like that are sort of episodic and not necessarily all, you know, that jump around, that have this peripatetic quality. And also I'm finding as I get older that this is the only kind of novel I can write anymore. because I don't want to. It's like, first of all, I wouldn't bother writing the corrections if I could, but that kind of linearity doesn't really particularly interest me anymore, and it hasn't for a long time. But Renata Adler is a very great model to have in mind. Just like keep it, just something with, no fat. Trim all the fat off of it.
Well, you also talk in your introduction about how you were curious about time and sort of time bending or time being flexible in this book. And certainly as a reader, it feels that way. That we are never quite sure. The only way we track the characters and sort of what's going on with them is either on the body, they gain weight or they lose weight, or it's beginning of summer, it's end of summer. But the rest of the time as it works, we're sort of hovering in this beautiful sort of cosmos of these folks. And I wondered, you talked about two forms of time that you were interested in, the Greek sort of, I had to write it down because I'm not that smart. I also lack imagination. It's chronos and kairos. You talk about this?
Right.
Was that a formal thing for you? Like, okay, how can I play with this, or was it?
Well, I had a bit in mind that this period. To make it to be clear about it, when I was writing the book, I wrote maybe the first third of the book the summer of 2001, and then 9/11 happened, and I still had 2/3 of the book to write, but I didn't want 9/11 to be part of this book. So suddenly it was sort of like everything had to be pulled forward into the space of time before that. So whatever maybe I had imagined, however I had imagined things spinning out with these people into chronological time, and chronos would have to occur in this strangely abbreviated and compressed like a dark hole or a black hole or something, of time, so that we wouldn't get to the event. So the whole book is like a premonition in a way of this event. It was weird because, again, things happen when you're writing a book that like the whole air disaster that happens at the beginning of the book was written before 9/11, and I had no inkling that anything like that was going to happen. But I found myself inserting that into the book before, and so in that sense, it's like there's these two forms of time that are going on. There's a chronological time. Of course, there's a backward look in the book as well, through the histories of the people. I didn't give them, like incredibly detailed backstories, but enough so that you kind of knew what their lives had been before, a little bit. I don't know really how to speak about these are great concepts of time that exist. I was thinking about them, but I wasn't thinking about them all the time.
Right, right. I was just curious what sort of formal play you set out for yourself, if any, at the outset of writing a novel, or what is your propeller?
Well, I hoped that the characters would surprise me in some way. They didn't.
We're back to lack of imagination.
Well, I think it's their lack of imagination. I gave them every chance. I did. But it came out the same every time. No, but I'll give you a concrete example of how fiction works, okay? The old man at the end, and it was Iguazu Falls. That's based on a real guy, but he wasn't in Iguazu Falls. He was in Goa, and he was the proprietor of the hotel restaurant where Charles Sobrage was apprehended when he escaped from Tahrir jail. When I was working on this whole thing with Charles Sobrage, I had to go to India. I had to go to the prison in Delhi for a month, and then I had to go down to Goa and met this guy at El Coquiro. And he was exactly this guy that you see in the book. But he wasn't at the falls in Iguazu, and he looked a little different. But it was his old mother singing his old Portuguese sailor songs. You know, Goa was a Portuguese colony. That's how fiction works. Well, it's true. You know, there's a big difference between Goa and Iguazu. There really is.
Something else I wanted to ask you about, Gary, and it's back to this idea of truth and cruelty and so forth. But you have always said, and I believe this, and other critics, Toby has said this, I have said this on the page, Christian, that actually at the center of your books is a tremendous amount of love for humanity, for well, maybe not all of them, but you know, some of them. Well, and I think it's interesting to think about this particular book as a series of love stories. Not simple-minded, but... Well,
in a way, I think. But it's very hard to discuss things in those terms. I mean, for me, it's like, how do you... there were people definitely depicted in this that I loved very much. I mean, I based these characters on. Others, not so much. Nothing comes out of contempt, except the Willies, I would say. A little bit contemptuous of, but I don't feel that way anymore, you see. So I guess, and again, bears out the point, I felt that way about them that year. And for 20 years after that. But later, I discovered that they had done some very nice things for people who really needed help. So
a little less to hate.
Yeah, well, forgiveness is good. We're going to stop, I think.
Yeah.
Let's
stop.
Well, do you have one more question?
No. I mean, somebody else might have a question. Do you want?
Right. I was supposed to do that too.
But we can ignore them, Gary, if you want.
Well,
you could just sneak out the side.
I don't want to ignore anybody, but yeah, it's hard to know what love is.
Do you want to?
I don't know. No, I don't. Is anybody burning with a desire to ask a question? I don't see any hands. I think we're done here.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, Gary. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, everyone, for coming. Bathrooms upstairs. Flag us if you need the accessible one. See you Friday or Wednesday or Friday. Have a very good night.